Hello and welcome to my video on concentric and eccentric motion in my daily life. My name is Megan Squires and this video is for my functional anatomy project for HKR 2310 with Dr. Jeanette Byrne. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down some videos of me doing some concentric and eccentric motions. I'm going to be talking about what muscles produce or control them and at what joint that they occur at. So a bit of background to some of these clips that you're going to be seeing is that some of them are from me working out at the gym back in like February, April, back in my winter semester. I used to go to the gym pretty much every single morning. So there's going to be definitely a good few from the gym. As well, I started doing cheer in May. And so you're going to see a lot of clips from my cheer gym. Some are going to be a bit more simpler movements and others are definitely a lot more challenging as I progressed really quickly in the sport. As well, there's going to be some basketball in there as well because I used to play a lot of basketball. So we're going to start with the clips from me at the gym. So right now I am performing tricep pull downs, which are one of my favorite workouts. And you can just see me doing the movements here. So basically a breakdown of this movement would be that it is a concentric motion occurring due to the triceps brachii, which are the main extensors of the elbow. You can see I start in flexion right here, and I'm going to pull down and extend my elbow at the elbow joint, like so. So the tricep muscles would indeed be shortening, which would make it a concentric contraction. The next movement that I'm doing are squats on the Smith machine. So for this particular movement, it is occurring in two different locations. So first, you can see as I squat, just focusing on the downward movement, that my knee at the knee joint goes into flexion. So this would be an eccentric contraction of the rectus femoris. Then you can see my hips, as they go down, they also flex. So this would be an eccentric contraction of the gluteus maximus at the hip joint. Next, I am doing tricep pushdowns on the tricep pushdown machine. And this would be another concentric movement by contracting the triceps brachii. As you can see, my elbows are starting at flexion. And as I push down, they are extending, which would occur at the elbow joint. One of my all-time favorite workouts has always been pull-ups. So just focusing on the upward pull of this motion, this would be a concentric contraction of the biceps brachii at the elbow joint. So you can see I pull myself up, I flex my elbow at the elbow joint. Next, I'm on the leg press machine, and for this specific workout, two movements are happening. So as you can see, we're just going to focus on the push motion. My knees start in flexion and they extend. So this would be a concentric contraction of the rectus femoris, and this would be occurring at the knee joint. As well, once my knees are extended, you can see my hips start in flexion and they extend. So this would be a concentric contraction of the gluteus maximus at the hip joint. Next, I'm on the hip abductor machine. So this would be a concentric contraction of the gluteus medius at the hip joint. You can see the beginning of this motion, I am abducting my hips. So I am pushing them out laterally and I'm abducting them. Another one of my favorite workouts has always been push-ups. My record for the most amount of push-ups all at the one time is actually 32, which I'm super proud of. But for this, we're going to focus on the upward movement of the push-up. So as you can see, my elbows are starting in flexion and they're extending. So this would be a concentric contraction of the triceps brachii at the elbow joint. You can see I start at about a 90-degree angle and I push up against gravity into extension. Next, I'm going to be analyzing my basketball shot and breaking down the movements that occur, because there are two movements that occur to produce the motion of the basketball leaving my hand. So the first would be occurring at the elbow joint. So you can see my elbow starts in flexion and extends, which would be a concentric contraction of the triceps brachii. And then right at the top, you can see my wrist goes from extension to flexion in order to produce that wrist flicking motion and puts the spin on the ball. This would be a concentric contraction of the flexor carpi ulnaris at the wrist joint, as my wrist is very slightly deviating ulnarly. Next, I'm going to analyze my back tuck. So the back tuck utilizes two motions to really get me high up in the air. So the first would be a concentric contraction of the rectus femoris, and this would occur at the knee joint. So as you can see, my knees begin in flexion right here, and they extend, and as they extend, it produces extension at the hip, which would be a concentric contraction of the gluteus maximus at the hip joint. So as my knees extend, then that produces hip extension, which gets me high enough in the air for the point of rotation to be high enough, like this, that I can fully rotate around and stick the landing. Another very common move in cheer would be a back handspring. So this is actually quite similar to the back tuck. Just in a back tuck, you kind of jump more straight up in the air, but as you can see with the back handspring, I try and jump long and jump backwards. So this would be first a concentric contraction of the rectus femoris in the knee, at the knee joint. And as you can see, once extension of the knee occurs, extension of the hip also occurs. So this would be a concentric contraction of the gluteus maximus at the hip joint, which is basically the exact same as the back tuck motion. A lot of the time in cheer, we combine a bunch of different moves all into the one sequence. So for example, right here, I'm doing 2 back handsprings. So you can see the first one. And I block and I go into the second one. And then I go up into back tuck. So this combines the 2 previous movements that I discussed. And so we have extension of the knees, which is a concentric contraction of the rectus femoris at the knee joint. Then we have concentric contraction of gluteus maximus at the hip joint, which produces hip extension. So both 3 of these motions use these movements. In cheer, we do a lot of jumps, and this one in particular is a toe touch. So the motion of the toe touch looks like this. So in order to reach that full middle split in the air, you can see that abduction is occurring at the hip joint. So this would be a concentric contraction of the gluteus medius in order to produce that full split like that. So I've discussed a lot of concentric contractions, which help to produce a lot of these movements in cheer and in workouts. But now I'm going to just have a look at some eccentric movements. So obviously for this motion right here, you can see as I finish the front handspring, my knees go into flexion. So this would actually be an eccentric contraction of the rectus femoris at the knee joint to control the movement as I pop up and then I land on my feet. Next, I'm going to look at my back handspring again, but just take notice of my shoulders in the back handspring. So when my hands hit the ground, my shoulders actually control the movement. So it will be an eccentric contraction of the levator scapulae at the shoulder joint. You can see that as my hands hit the ground, my shoulders absorb the shock. Going back to some of my workout videos, we're going to focus on the downward movement of the pull-up. So this would be an eccentric contraction of the biceps brachii at the elbow joint, as the movement is being controlled as I slowly lower myself down from the pull-up. Back to the hip abductor machine, we are going to look at now the motion of adduction of the hips. So when adduction is occurring, this is actually an eccentric contraction of the gluteus medius at the hip joint to control the movement coming inward. Ending with the push-up, we're just going to look now at the downward movement of the push-up. So this would actually be an eccentric contraction of the biceps brachii at the elbow joint. So you can see the movement as I go down to the ground is controlled as my elbow goes into flexion, and it is controlled